think we've arrived at our appointed start time. Thank you all for joining us at this NETMOD session at IETF 120 in Vancouver. I am Lou Berger. Kent Watson is here next to me, and we have a new secretary, James Cumming. James, and there you go, hand up over there. We thank our outgoing, Jason is going to be away from the IETF for a little while. I wasn't sure what we were saying there, but Jason's away from the IETF for a little while, and we really appreciate all his help and contribution to the working group and to us chairing the sessions. And we also appreciate that he helped find a replacement for himself. So welcome, James. Next. Thank you. I did drop in chat the link to the note-taking tool. Please join that link and help us capture what discussions we have here. And as a reminder, you don't need to capture what's on the slides. This is our Note Well slide. Being in IETF, we have certain policies governing our disclosure of our ideas, our technical work. Those are covered through a series of best common practices, these BCPs. If you're not familiar with this, it's really important that you go and become familiar with it. Basically, anything you say here becomes a contribution to the IETF and becomes part of our permanent record. We also have guidelines about how we treat each other. We do sometimes get a little animated in our discussions and our opinions, but we should keep in mind to always treat each other with respect and professionally and keep it technical. It is perfectly okay to have a technical disagreement, but we still have to conduct ourselves professionally. And we have guidelines on that, and we also have escalation procedures if you feel that you have not been treated appropriately. So for those in the room, this is actually aimed at you, because those who are remote who are listening, they've already been successful in this. So if you're in the room, please make sure to scan in. That helps us keep track of the number of attendees, which gets us the right size room. It's also how we participate in queuing up for comments. We'd like to be fair between those who are in the room and those who are outside the room. So we will be using that tool. Also, if we have any polls, they will take place using the tool. So please make sure to scan in. I think I've actually covered these points, but it's a great reminder to join us for joint minute taking. This is really important. If you have a comment at the mic and you want us to make sure we got it right, go check and make sure it's captured properly. If we have an action that you hear us talk about, that's really important to be captured, and everyone's help in that is appreciated.
Additionally, the URL for the note taking, James pasted it to the chat window.
Our agenda is slightly modified from what was originally posted. We haven't renumbered the slots, but we've sort of done some reordering. The first change is that we have 2 working group documents that have been proceeding at a very slow pace. And I think I'm even being generous with that. And the current editors have said they apologize for not getting out an update, but they will get an update before the next meeting. And they are item number 6, and they've been scratched. The other thing is that we have a new document that actually sort of, in our opinion, we could have started as a working group document because it's a spin out of existing working group document, and we had it at the end. It was a little silently done. So at the time we put this agenda together, we didn't realize it was a spin out of the existing versioning work. So we'll hear about that all together. This is a little bit in micro font. So we have a number of post last call. Actually, before I go there, we have a common Yang data types that has been going through the process, the publication process, and the current author editor doesn't seem to be overly responsive. So we're asking the working group for a little help here to help bring this one over the line, to bring it to completion. And if you are interested in helping out on this document as editor, please contact us. It should be a pretty small amount of work, and you'll get your name on an RFC, your name in shiny lights. Mahesh, you're in queue. I guess he didn't expect me to.
Mahesh Yetanandani. So yes, I want to support Lou's comment. This particular document, 6991 biz, has been sitting on my queue for 400 plus days, and I would really like to get my stats under control, and I appreciate any help from this group to pick up an editor for the document.
Are you going to volunteer? Maybe we'll shift the document shepherding to someone else.
All I'll say is I think a lot of the comments that were probably gating this document before seem to have been resolved. So
Agreed.
It should be a fairly easy process to get this over the line. So would really appreciate some help. I also had a question on the previous slide. So the common interface extension and sub-interface, I know both the drafts expired, I think last week, and I'm wondering what is holding progress on these two drafts.
Rob, I don't know if you've been tracking this, but if you would like to jump in. So Rob was once an author of these, and then he became AD, and then, so.
Yes, so author, AD, back to an author, but I mean, Scott's been editing these mostly, so we did.
And then Scott is in queue if you want to defer to him.
Oh yes, brilliant. I'll defer to Scott. That's a better choice. But...
So Scott, you're up.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
So I didn't think they had expired yet. I think they expire next week. If they expired this week or last week, I apologize. So the plan is to get them to refresh them. They're in that funky state, which is probably not unlike the state of the one we just talked about, the types draft, is that there's almost no comments. The issue tracker has been tracked, and it's just a matter of doing the final editing and getting the request to push it along in the process. So it shouldn't be that much work, just like the last one we just talked about. So I'm hoping to find more time over the next month to get that done and out to the mailing list. Thanks.
That's great, Scott. And if you are successful at the end of the summer, maybe in September, we can have last call on these. Again, after what, 4 years? Did we do a last call 4 years ago? I think so. All right.
Yeah, that would be great.
That would be really appreciated. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
And if I get that one done, then maybe I'll do the other one too. But I got to get these two done first.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're running a little bit behind, so I'm going to go a little quickly on these. We have a list of post last call documents. I'll highlight one, the very first one, because this is me not getting my job done. I have a document that wrapped up about a couple of weeks ago that's now ready for publication. So sometime this week, I'm going to submit that one for publication. I don't think we have any open issues. We have a couple of others that are waiting on the authors. When we get those revisions, we will, based on the change, we'll see whether or not we have to do another last call. I don't think so, but we'll see. We have a couple on the agenda. We'll hear from those. And then one of our favorite is the syslog model. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Ken.
The dependency has been resolved, right? It's the right TLS. It's I think it's RC editor queue right now.
So we're close.
No. The dependency is an RFC editor queue.
I know.
The
So-
syslog draft needs to be updated to
Right.
reflect it.
And you have the test. You're going to update it?
It's
excuse
just a
me?
matter of regenerating the examples, tree diagram.
Yeah, Joe Clark, we updated it right after you made the last change to the TLS client server back in March. So it should be ready to go.
All right, that's great. Okay, unless anyone has anything else they'd like to hit on this slide, I'm going to go to the next slide. We do have one incoming liaison. There's a document available. I think I read it as the document differs slightly from the slides, but so it might be worth reviewing, but we're also going to hear about that on the agenda. So there's the opportunity to ask questions later. I think we're pretty familiar with working remote at this point. Just keep in mind, we have resources available to the working group that include informal meetings as well as formal meetings. And we have resources that we can make available to the working group members if they would like them. And a final note, we had a process change where we are now asking that for every meeting at the time of the ID cutoff, and that's important, at the time of the ID cutoff, we'd like updates sent to the list from all authors or a request for a meeting slot. Those are the choices, but we'd like not to wait until the actual meeting for that update. So we give time for the working group to consider the status and decide if they want to contribute anything during this meeting or before this meeting. In the past, we've done updates right before, and there's not really enough time to appropriately react for discussion, and we want to leave that opportunity. With that said, does anyone have anything they'd like to bring up on an existing document that is not on the agenda?
Lou, this is Tim Carey. I was just curious about two things that were on your status. One was on the no tags that you said it was parked and because it failed last call. And the other was on the best practices biz. Could you give us a status update, or could we get a status update on those two?
Sure. On the best practice, I don't remember off the top of my head, maybe you do, but I don't believe that one is stalled, but I just don't remember it off the top of my head. I'll have to go back to
That
the
one
slide.
has what?
Best practices.
Yes.
On no tags.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what your response to the best practices was.
My response is I don't have that off the top of my head.
Okay.
I apologize.
Sorry.
I will try to look back on it and come back to you maybe even during
Okay.
the session. On no tags, we went to this document had a tepid acceptance. There was enough for us to say we'll work on it. And we were really hoping for there to be more interest generated. And then we went to last call and we just heard crickets. And so our read is there's not really adequate support beyond
To go further.
the authors to progress this.
Okay. Thanks.
And if for some reason the group thinks we got it wrong, the document's there, we can take it out of the parking lot. All right, we're going to move on. And Joe, are you next?
Rob and Joe.
Rob and Joe. I'm not sure who's coming up first.
Clicker. I'm setting the timer for 15 minutes.
Oh, I hope this will be quick. Hi, my name is Joe Clark with Cisco. On behalf of the authors and contributors who get on a call every Tuesday or so to talk about Yang module versioning. This is our update. We're hoping we've converged around a lot of the working group comments that have happened around this. and that we're making some good progress towards a new last call. Why may?
It's, you have to select.
Oh, okay, sorry. Try now?
Yep. So where are we? We're in Vancouver. We collected the feedback from the working group. We presented this last time at 119, and we got some feedback not only from the working group, from the chairs. Specifically, we'll get to one of these bullet points. Lou made a comment based on what we said there. So we consolidated all that feedback. We went back and we started to make edits, and we discussed the edits, and we answered some emails on the list, and we came up with the two versions I'm going to talk about now. And not a lot has changed. So we published those two new revisions just ahead of this meeting. We sent a brief summary to the list in what we changed, and we asked the chairs to call a new, since these have already gone through one working group last call, to call a new working group last call. Now, the one thing that came up that we had decided not to address, and we mentioned this last time at 119, was this idea of file naming. So you may recall that, and I know Per will discuss this, we had this text in there about recommended file naming with respect to Yang Simver. And we said, you know what, we're not getting a lot of consensus around that. Let's pull it out. And Lou said, well, or maybe it was both of us. Wait, why are you dodging this issue? We don't want to create an ad hoc standard. So Per opted to take this on and adapt some of that text. And I won't steal his thunder, but he is presenting that footnoted module there today. So we are not dodging the work. It's just going to be done in a separate draft, potentially. Now, what did we change? So in Yang module versioning, in the latest revision, which is -12, we just did some minor text clarifications, some typo fixes, and we explicitly stated that the work applies to both Yang 1 and 1.1. So that was the sole set of changes between what we presented in 119 and what is currently in Data Tracker today. Okay. With respect to Yang Simver, there was a bit more changes in here. The reviewers, the authors, contributors went back and forth and said, you know, there are some things that could be clarified a little bit better, especially with respect to how you might change the versioning in a submodule with respect to the main module. So we added some clarification around that. And then we could have done a better job at explaining why one might want to skip version numbers. So remember, we had text in there that said you could go from a 1.0, 1.1, and then come up with a 2.0 and then a 5.0. Why would you skip numbers between, say, 2.0 and 5.0? So we added some text and an example of why, say, a vendor might want to do that if they're making a lot of internal changes. They're not releasing those modules, but then they're going to come out with a module that will be publicly consumable, and they still want to signal the non-backwards or backwards compatibility there. There was some ambiguity around normative language, so we softened some of the language to make the normative bits a little bit clearer. And there was one thing that as we migrated text from Yang module versioning to Yang Simver that we talked about in the last meeting, because we were changing some of the scope here and there, some of the text in the Yang module itself, the Yang Simver module itself, got a little long in the tooth. It was no longer valid, so we synced that with the text that's actually in the draft. It's always a good idea to review and make sure everything matches and is consistent. So that's just consistency. So these were a lot of really editorial changes around the document for the most part, but we think it adds a lot of clarity and again addresses everything that we've heard thus far. So click in window, please. Thanks. I think this is the last slide. There we are. So we want to get this next and hopefully last working group, last call kicked off, and then digest the comments that we get back. Questions, comments? Well, that was fast.
Thank you.
All right.
So before we talk about your next steps,
Yes.
we're going to actually go over to Per out at sort of out of original order. So, there we go. So we're going to jump to what's labeled as slide deck 11.
I'm Per from Cisco. On the behalf of the module versioning authors, present this work, which Joe did an excellent job in introducing. So this was work that we removed from the drafts, as Joe said, and now we're bringing it back in a separate draft. As an experimental draft, and to investigate if it's a good standard to have, also documenting current industry usage, because this is used in some places already in proprietary tools. So the solution, excuse me, the solution overview is to allow the current schema with an at and a date, but also allow this new schema with this Yang semantic version, hash sign as a delimiter, and you can see an example at the bottom. This is the ABNF for it. Details. The motivation for this work is that working group requested us to, well, not dodge this issue, but to address it. But why do we want this at all? To simplify for module consumers to be able to, at a glance, see the module and see how do I need to look at this to for my compatibility issues or not. And also to, since this is actually prevalent in some tools, proprietary tools, to standardize it now before several solutions emerge. Yeah, so there are known implementations. I did a hackathon in IETF 119 hackathon to add the support to Piang. As you probably can understand, it's more or less trivial for all tools to add this. And the next steps is to then adopt this draft and to finalize it to guide the industry in showing what this Yang fileName conversion can be. I believe that's the last slide. Thanks. Questions?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Can you go back one?
So,
Maybe not. Okay, great. Thank you. Our reading of the document is that this is a spin out of the December document. Is that a correct reading?
that is correct.
So that was a spin out of a working group document. So to become a working group document, I think if the authors had said, hey, can we make this a working group document? We, the chairs, would have said, you're taking part of a working document, it's appropriate to make it a working group document. So we don't believe adoption is necessary.
Okay,
We think we should consider it adoption and would like to republish as is. The more substantive question, if we can go back to, I think it's your second or third slide, you've mentioned that you want to go experimental. Can you tell us why you want to do this and what you think you're going to get out of being experimental versus standards track?
So that was what was discussed in the group to show that this can be used, because there was some contention in changing the Yang file naming as it's said from RFC 7950, and then it would update that document, and that hit some obstacles. So
this is a negotiated extension, correct? Is it? It's an extension. It's not used without. It won't cause a compatibility issue because of a negotiated. It's being negotiated as an extension. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's up to the server to read the file.
Okay.
Yeah, or the tools. So the thing, the big issue is to evolve all the tools in the industry. So if I, for instance, start to publish with this file name conversion, maybe like half the industry can't consume those modules with their tooling.
Right.
So that's the big issue, I believe.
Okay. So I think it's good to hear from the list, but from the queue, excuse me. But the one thing to keep in mind is an experiment has very specific meaning in as currently interpreted in the process. You have to have a defined period that you are conducting an experiment, and you want to have specific results. I think by the definition of how experiments are defined today, this does not meet, is not a candidate for an experimental draft.
Yeah,
So
the experimental process is new to me. So
Yeah, so I
I
think-
tried reading up on it, and I thought it fit the bill, and that was also what was discussed in the version
the group, yeah. So I think
But
the
if-
document out isn't always so clear, the documentation. Uh, My personal view is, or view as one co-chair, so I haven't asked Kent this, but my view would be to take this to proposed standard and let's last call it and see where the chips fall. But that would be my approach to the document. But we have people in queue, so let's hear.
just to clarify, so action points now are.
Action point is wait for the end of the discussion,
Yeah.
and then we'll summarize. But
Yeah, just to
if before the discussion, the experimental isn't the right place, let's have a discussion, see where we end up.
Mahesh Jetanandani, I had a very similar comment to Lou when I got on the queue. Same question, why experimental, why not a proposed standard? And the meta point underneath is also to try to address, I think, a comment that Andy made on the list, and I'm surprised he's not here. In the queue, he's not in the queue as yet. The whole question of naming of the file and its compatibility with existing Yang 1.1 specification. So if we can try to see if we can address that question, it'll be nice.
Do you want to repeat your answer? I think that someone had answered it on the list, or maybe it was from the last meeting. So
Is it the name of the file or is it another versioning scheme inside the file? I don't remember. Maybe you
It's
did.
the file name.
It is the file name. Okay.
And
Not-
can
not
you
yet
address
another.
compatibility, backward compatibility also?
Sorry,
Can you address is it backward compatible?
it depends on the tooling, right?
No, it is backwards compatible
Yeah.
because it maintains the existing file naming strategy. That doesn't change. It's still supported, right?
Yeah, it maintains the old, yeah,
Yeah,
so it
so-
doesn't deprecate the date.
So Rob Wilton, Cisco. So if I remember correctly, the reason we spun this out was because there was reticence when we were doing last call of the other documents as to whether this was acceptable or not. And there's some opinions as to whether this is backwards compatible or not. And I can see two views of that. The one that's being expressed up there is that we're keeping the old format and we're introducing a new one, so no existing tools break. But by introducing this new naming convention, it means that tooling that's using versioning might start to export files and provide those to clients using this name format for the file name, rather than using the revision dates that they're using before. So at that point, is such there is a minor, that could break tools. It would be a trivial script to fix that and change that. So that's the sort of change. And I think that's what drove us to take this work out into a separate document first. And that was the reason why we were trying to do that, was because the thought was maybe this should be addressed as part of Yang Next. My concern is Yang Next could be a very long time away. We discuss this a bit later on. And so I guess the experimental flag was trying to, I don't know where that came from, but that was trying to say, look, we think this is where the industry is going to go, but I'm not sure it's ready to get there yet. I do take your point that experimental has these very strict rules. And also to Lou's point of wanting to last call and see what happens, I think that's a good idea. A standards track.
Rashad, Equinix, actually question to the chairs. I mean, you mentioned that the document would be adopted automatically. Does that mean we're going to do last call on all three of them together and then,
Yes.
proceed together? Okay, thank you.
Italo Busi. I also in favor of the experimental because having two names, two naming rules can be a source of confusion. How can I say that two files which different names are exactly the same model? So having as an experimental helps understanding which one is the main naming rules rather than which one we are experimenting. And about the value of the experiment can be an experiment because this is a very good naming scheme maybe for the Yang next. So we can experiment, and experiment is up to the time where we have it adopted as the only naming rule for the new Yang. That's my opinion. That helps to coexist in the meanwhile and provides a success story at the end.
Do you want to respond? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's recommended to not have the same model with different file names. So either you use the old @date schema or the new.
Yeah, but you have
hash.
different repositories, different implementations. That's where you get confused. Yeah.
Andy Bierman, and I was the person who suggested that maybe should be experimental, because the Yang 1.1 RFCs say that this must be the way the file name looks. So I'm concerned about putting new standards out there that say, forget what that standard says, now you do it this way. And as soon as you say you may do it this way, you're forcing every other tool to must accept that. And I'm not ready for that. Yang 1.1 tools are done this certain way. There are a lot of complexities with now mixing all these file names together and the search paths, and you know, there's issues there. So I thought this was fine for the next version of Yang, or experimental, where it's definitely not overwriting anything from Yang 1.1.
So Kent, as the chair, I am actually unfamiliar with the experimental rules, but is there a way for this document to conform to the experimental rules?
I think from a practical standpoint, if we go experimental, we might as well just say, let's abandon this work. I don't think experimental is really a viable path forward.
Sorry, can I get the answer? Are we able to make this document conform to the rules of an experimental document?
So I think I'm looking to the current and ex-ADs in the room, but I'd have to go refresh my memory also. But it is, experimental is supposed to be defined for a particular experiment. So we'd have to design what the experiment is. And as people that are building tooling and infrastructure, technology, I think it'll be hard for us to say this is an experiment that will be successful or successful in getting information as to what to do next. I want to go.
Small comment.
Yeah.
Maybe the experiment was already successful last IETF hackathon.
Yeah, I think Lou's right. I think you'll struggle to get this through as an experimental RFC. I think the IESG, when they are evaluating, will say this is not an experiment. You could potentially go informational as another choice, but I don't know. I think it's sort of tricky in a way. I do get Andy's point about existing tooling, but I don't really know. I think the choice is either we do this and we do it standards track, or we wait until Yang next and then it gets deferred to then. I think that's the two real choices here. I think anything else is just sort of muddying the waters.
Yeah, the other thing that occurred to me when looking at the ABNF, and I haven't thought about it enough to think of whether it's a good or ridiculous idea, is to, instead of making the revision date optional, make it required. So you would actually have a date plus a version always. And yes, you would still change the date when you change the version. And that would allow you to be backward compatible with tooling, but allows you. No, you're saying no. As I said, I haven't thought about this. This is on the fly. But
I think the tools will still do a regex match on the name, and it still fail on that combined one. Or it end up treating the version as part of the module name string. So I think the tooling has to change. It's a trivial tweak, but it had to change.
Right. So I think the way forward is, let's try change it to proposed standard. We'll publish it as a working group document. Let's go to last call, see what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to move to
Slide number 3. Stefan.
Yeah. Person.
Sorry, I don't have the control.
You should have it
Yes.
now.
Yeah, thank you. So hello everyone. My name is Chu Fang, and so this presentation is about the system-defined configuration update. And the working group last call was initiated on version 5, 3 or 4 months ago, which is after IETF 119. And a lot of excellent comments were received after then, and we are now at version 8. Which tries to incorporate a lot of working group last call comments and the young doctors last call review comments as well. So a lot of changes were made in recent revisions, and generally the authors think that all issues should have been resolved now, but this might be highly subject to feedback from reviewers. So for this presentation, the main focus would be to highlight some working group last call issues that we think are worth discussion, and as well as our proposals, and see if there is any other concerns or objections. So the first one is about what needs to be copied from system into running, and it's a question for both clients' explicit declaration and servers auto-configuring triggered by resolve system parameter. So if you have read the previous version of the draft, we used to state that only the parts that are required to make running valid need to be copied. For example, the list entry with at least the key, if it's reference, and then the entry with at least a key needs to be copied. But the recent discussion reveals that for the uncopied parts, there is concern that Lexi clients are unclear whether they are not set versus not copied. So the proposal, the current documents that asks to copy the entire reference system nodes, for example, the entire list entry. So this is not only to not confuse the Lexi clients, but also to save the energy and efforts for the client or server to calculate the minimum. And assume that the space is not a big deal, we think that it might be a better choice for the client or server to copy the entire instead of the minimum. And then the second issue is about the merging behavior of system and running. And the proposed architecture proposed to allow system and running system is merged with running to create the contents of intended. So the question is whether we should specify the merge behavior of system and running. And I think it is more specific to the question how order by user lists and leaf lists are merged. Do the running values go before or after, or if this is a case where a full replacement is needed? So after thinking about it, we think that this draft should not define what merge means, as this is not really specific to system configuration and to this draft. But this won't affect the behavior of modifying and overriding system configuration. I think this is a case which is more related to changing the values of system-defined nodes, like a leaf, the value of the leaf node. So the proposal from the authors would be to leave it unspecified, and examples avoiding implicitly defining merge logic. But suppose we do have some examples of system-defined entries and user-provided list entries being merged together and show the results of intended. But suppose lists, when not ordered by user, are safer as examples than leaf lists. So we think it might be okay if there is some list examples. And then the last one, I will go through all the working group last call issues and then went through the comments on the queue. I will be quick to finish. So the last one is about the impact of resolve system parameter on the candidate or private candidate data store. So we used to have a lot of discussion about the impact on the running data store when it refers to the candidate or private candidate, a client may edit the candidate or private candidate data store without expecting it to be valid until a commit or validate operation takes place. So the draft now states that the resolve system parameter may be used in 3 cases. The client makes an edit to the candidate or private candidate and use this parameter to ask the configuration to be valid. This might be possible, though may not be needed. Or the client issues a validate or commit operations, and with this parameter being carried, and the current document has augmented the validate and commit operations with the resolve system parameter. And so more specifically for the private candidate document, the draft specifies the concept of configuration conflict and the resolution of conflict. So configuration copied by the server may conflict with the contents of running, but really the resolution is identical to resolution of conflict caused by the configuration explicitly provided by the client. So there is not that difference. And for the next steps, the authors would like to request the working group to review the update. We have the feeling that a lot of times, even the basic ideas were reached upon, the potentially inappropriate wording may still lead to confusion or misunderstandings. So please help review the update and even better propose text. And given a lot of changes, the authors are unsure whether this would need another working group last call. Okay, I think that's it from my side. I see Rob in the queue. So maybe you are referring to the merging issue.
So a couple of comments. First one is, yes, I gave you some review comments at the last call. I will go back and check the resolution of those. But yes, in the merge, I don't know whether or not this document needs to say what the merge behavior is. I think what is required here is the merge behavior has to be deterministically known. We can't leave it sort of vague where different implementations will choose different merge behaviors. It has to be well specified. So it may be that this picks up the behavior from netconf and it's already well defined, or it may need to be defined here, but we can't leave any ambiguity. So I don't know which way that is, but this needs some resolution.
Okay.
So it was our intent to do a second last call on this document.
Oh, that sounds good.
Just to make it, just so we can cleanly close it out.
Okay, sounds good to me.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next slide.
It's Shufanga?
Yes.
Yeah, it's me.
Okay.
Sorry, just give me a second to bring it up. A little bit slow. And then I have to...
Okay, so this is a presentation about a common Young data model for scheduling. And I will give a document status since last IETF meeting. So during the last IETF meeting week, we had another side meeting with authors of TVR Schedule Young to discuss their specific requirements. So the TVR working group is chartered to define data modules that address time-based and schedule changes to a network. So the intention of our draft really is to be served as a common building block, and so that they can use and then define their own specific schedule Young data module. And then this draft is adopted in NETMOD working group after IETF 119, and please feel free to report issues or propose changes on our GitHub repo. And so now we have some drafts that use this common schedule Young in other working groups. We have the scheduling OIM tests in Ops area working group, which is designed to perform schedule network diagnosis procedures. And then we have the UCL document to enable the scheduled activation of access control policies. And then we have the TVR schedule Yang work to manage the network devices and topology with time variant attributes. And so since this is designed to be common and generic, the key design rationale would be better modularity and ease of reuse. So Mahesh, you are in the queue. Do you want to comment on this slide?
I think he wants to wait until the end
Okay,
or until the next slide.
okay. So the major updates since IETF 119, we have addressed the working group adoption comments, which I think is mainly from Drew. We improve the narrative text and enrich examples and fix needs. And we also incorporate comments raised during IETF 119 TVR session. And they have a requirements for a machine-friendly recurrence grouping, which is formatted using the UTC. So we split the definition into UTC and time zone types to accommodate different needs. And we also have the parameters naming improvement. So for the UTC specific recurrence, we rename the start time of the first recurrence to UTC start time instead of that time start. And there are some other updates that authors identified to be needed. So we had examples of using schedule Yang module in the context of RFC 84 and 13, which is about the framework for scheduled use of TE resources. We show how that framework can be used in our can use our scheduling Yang groupings, and we also add relation to the Disman schedule MIP defined in RFC 3231. So this slide shows the mapping between schedule Yang and the MIP. And generally, a majority of the MIP objects are supported by the schedule Yang. And some objects that are not supported are shown on the left side of the slide. So for the schedule owner, we don't have the owner defined, but if the working group has a preference, we may need to add one. And others objects like the context name, this might be, I think should not be included in the common scheduling Yang definition, as we should not care the using context of scheduling. And the schedule last failure error code could highly depend on its invoked action. And also other objects like the storage type and the scheduled variable and value. This is one we think would be SNMP specific, so not supported in Yang. And for the next steps, again, we would like to request working group review, and also not only in NETMOD and also other working groups. So the document update will keep them informed as well. And we will also continue to collaborate with authors of our consumer drafts. And as we think this draft is stable now, we would like to request Young Doctors early review after this IETF meeting. And the final object would be to target the working group last call before the next IETF meeting. So as we wish to move forward fast to not block a lot of consumer drafts. That's the general intention. Okay, that's it.
The chairs requested the Yang Doctor review this morning.
Oh, thank you.
Mahesh Jetanandani. And this might be just a process question. I don't know what happened in the side meeting between TVR and NETMOD, or the authors of this draft. I'm wondering if TVR working group is chartered to define the Yang model for time-based or scheduling. And what I understand that this draft does is essentially define groupings.
Yes.
For that is why the two drafts are not being merged. Is there a reason to keep them separate?
Yes, so the TVR working group is chartered to define the scheduled changes of the network attributes. So they are specific to the change of network properties. But we also have other use cases like the scheduling OIM test to schedule a network diagnosis action, doing some OIM test based on a scheduling. Or we also have other documents in Observer working group that is designed to enable the scheduled activation of SL policies. So there are different use cases of scheduling, not only the single scheduled network attributes. So that's the reason why we would like to split this out into common groupings and be used as common building blocks. And then other use cases can build on top of these groupings.
Mahesh is walking back to his chair, so I think your response was satisfied him. And we're going to move on to the next presentation.
Okay. Immutable flag. Not this one.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so this presentation is going to be quick. And the document status, this draft was discussed at the February NETMOD virtual meeting, and the authors would like to show our thanks to a lot of active participants and their great comments. And then the document was adopted just before the IETF 119. And before this IETF meeting, we published a new revision to incorporate inputs received as an interim, as well as some other issues identified by authors. So this presentation is going to be report some the main change since last IETF meeting. So actually, generally a lot of clarifications were made on the immutable flag. We are clear on the following bullet points shown on this slide. So the first is about that servers may suppress annotation if it's inherited from its parent node or uses the default values as the top level nodes, but are not precluded from returning the annotations on every single element. So currently each case is it's allowed without preference to not to add too many restrictions on the server's response. And the immutable flag has no bearing on the list or leaf list entry ordering and addition of new entries. So currently immutable flag is defined as a metadata annotation which is attached to the individual list or leaf list entry. So we think it might not be a good idea to use this annotation to has bearing on the ordering and addition thing. And immutable data can always be copied into or deleted from running, as immutable configuration can only be created by the server and that's present in system. So client can always copy a same value as found in system and also delete it from running. But this just mean making a copy of system configuration visible or invisible in running. And server must ignore any immutable annotations sent from the client. And finally, it's about the immutability and the value of immutable data must only change via software upgrade, hardware resources change, or license change. Because so we are locking in these three cases that allow the immutability to change, because generally we don't think it's a good idea that if server can dynamically decide what it considers immutable. So that's so we only allow these three cases that the immutability and its value can change. And other changes, these are identified by authors. We believe these are needed. So we formally update the existing netconf and resconf specifications, as this draft extends the existing protocol operations with an additional input parameter with immutable to ask the annotation to be responded from the server side, and related sessions are added to clarify and update details. And we also add RESTconf support of immutable flag, as really it should not be netconf specific. Okay, Mahesh in the queue.
There was a joint coordination meeting between 3GPP and IETF earlier today. And this particular draft was cited as an interest from 3GPP. They would want to know if and when the draft has reached some level of maturity, that a liaison statement be sent from the working group towards 3GPP.
Are you asking or stating?
I'm asking, maybe the chairs could, once you feel that the document has reached some level of maturity, that we issue a liaison statement to 3GPP.
So
We have asked for a liaison statement to be sent to them.
So we certainly can issue a liaison immediately that says this work is underway. So that is easy. Saying this work is done, I think, takes us to at least doing a last call.
Yeah, I would say
And
maybe.
so if you're saying you want to do it now, we could say, sure, please propose some text you'd like to see sent. And then we can get, socialize it and get agreement, and we can move forward with that immediately. It can't say more than we're working on it.
True. I was, when
So
I
if you
said,
want, so that's one option. The
Yeah.
other option is wait for last call, and then we can say, this is being submitted for publication by the working group. So which one from a inter-SDO process standpoint do you think is more valuable?
based on my understanding of what they discuss, they're not particularly interested in providing any comments and feedback to the document as is. They're just interested in the status. So I think what would make sense is that when you do reach last call consensus, that would be a good time to let them. Okay.
Charles?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so kind of on the same subject. The reason this came up in the coordination call was that the LS was received back in March of 2023, I believe. And so if this, the one option is, I think, as was already covered, once we think this work is essentially done, or even that we could even wait till it has published as an RFC, then let 3GPP know. But the thought was that, 3GPP provided some requirements, and if we're sure that we're addressing their requirements with this draft as it currently exists, well, then great, maybe this isn't needed. But the thought was, well, it might be good in parallel with us perhaps going to working group last call to say, this is what the working group is thinking, and we want to run it by you and let us know, hey, is this really meeting your use cases and your needs before it gets published as an RFC.
So that's an interesting approach. Typically, we have not taken requirements in liaisons or taken specific action on liaisons in the working groups I've participated in. We would expect that contributions would be made inside our process that say whether or not the requirement is being addressed, or to bring in mechanisms to address those requirements. I don't know, I mean, this is really an IAB question of whether or not we want to send out a liaison saying, please tell us if we met your requirements. That's definitely different than any group I've operated in. again, I don't know if Mahesh or XAD Rob wants to say anything, but to me, this seems a little different than our normal process. Mahesh is coming to the mic. You can take the short one if you want.
I would agree that I think this is rather undefined, but based on our processes, if they need to provide comments to the draft itself, they should do it now rather than wait. My understanding, Charles, you probably closer to this, so you know better. If they're looking to provide comments, let them come to IETF or provide the comments on the mailing list. And my idea was that we would give them send them a liaison, giving them a status update when the draft is matured.
I would say if we're really looking to have their input, we should send it now and say that if they would like to provide input, please do so through standard IETF contributions and participation.
I agree.
Yeah, and that would meet my goal too.
Yeah, I was also going to agree. So I was like, Wales and ID, I had a similar example with something that went to ICANN, I think, where we wanted them to comment on what we were doing. And effectively for that one, when we reached IETF last call, we had a liaison ready to go to send to them saying, the IETF last call has started. It's going to end on this date, and you need to provide comments using the normal IETF mechanism. Here's the pointer to the mailing list. I mean, you could do it to the working group last call, but I think for that, the key was to get, they need to provide the comments into the IETF process in the same way as everything else, any other participant. And all you're doing is advertising them to say, this is happening now. So come along.
Okay. Is anyone interested in drafting a liaison statement for review on the list? Looking for a volunteer to help.
No, I'm not volunteering for that. But I thought the subtlety was Rob saying do it when we issue the working group last call. You're saying do it now. Send a.
He said we had a liaison ready to go.
Oh, okay.
So whether we decide to do it now or when we last call, we need that liaison text ready to go. So I would expect that when we draft that liaison text, we make the decision at that time, whether we send it immediately or wait for working group last call. I don't think we need, either way, we need the text. So Rob, are you volunteering? So Rob is definitely going to volunteer. So appreciate it. Thank you, Rob. And we'll work offline with you.
All right.
And
Thank
the
you.
Definitely
authors
capture that in the
might
minutes. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
I was just saying, thank you, Shafan. We're moving on. To
Okay, okay. I just want to say the authors might help as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so hello, I'm Jean. So I'm going to present the updates on the Young full update, full embed, or full include. Oh, thank you very much. So, oh, sorry. Great. So yeah, just to recall, the goal of this is to reuse the modules that have been defined at the device level, for instance, the IETF interfaces, to reuse it at the network level. So basically put it in a list with a device ID. And if you want to do that in Yang today, it's very difficult. So basically you can do copy pasting. You can rewrite the module so that they have a grouping that you can reuse, or you can use the schema mount. So this is basically the goal of this draft. And just to say, the use case that was triggered is the data manifest, where we want to reuse the Young push information to have it per device in the data manifest. So this is basically filling the gap that was in the Young schema mount. So they said in this draft, they cover only the implementation time and runtime. So in this draft, we want to cover the design time. So otherwise, it should be the same semantics, except that it's not the same time, but the same kind of behavior that we want. And so this is the example. So it's a little bit garbled here, but basically the idea is that if you want to reuse the model, first you need to import it. So here we import IETF interfaces and IETF IP, IP being an augmentation of the IETF interfaces. And then we have this any data node that is the same as our moon point, let's say in the schema mount. And inside, we will say the list of modules that we want to import, and that would be it to define a module that includes other modules, basically. So for the semantic of what happens within contents is the same as what is already defined in the schema mount. So basically, if you have a leaf ref, you cannot escape the moon point. So the updates on this draft were basically that we need some kind of place to store the information about what is supported in the embedding points. So basically, a way to do that would be to add some, include in the Young library, and to say for this data store and this path to the embedding. So here the embedding path would be the absolute path to the any data node that contains the included module. We want to say this is the schema that is available here. And with this schema, we can specify the feature, the deviations, and so on. But the main idea is that we only need that for the implementation. At design time, we don't have any implementation, so we basically just list the young modules that we want to have in the moon point. There is another part about the recursive embedding. So there is a risk when you do that you include modules and you have a kind of a set of modules that can repeat themselves. And actually, in the draft, we forbid a module to include itself. And then, since you need to import other modules, there is a kind of argument that this rule is enough to prevent this kind of infinite recursion. So you cannot create with the basic Young rules plus the rule that you cannot embed a module inside himself, you cannot create a fully recursive schema. At some point, it will stop. And so I think that's it. So last time, I had some feedback from FreeGPP and BBF that they needed this kind of module. So I would like to have a little bit of details about these use cases to make sure that it fits, and that would be great. There is a question whether this can be done like right now or whether we should wait for Young next. So I have at least one draft that is depending on this. So there is another question about the parent nodes mechanism. So whether we need to copy that from schema mount. And there is also the possibility to do some finer imports. So instead of importing the whole module, start importing only parts of the module. I think that's a nice idea. I would like to wait for the implementation of the first part to be done before going into the second part. And of course, we need to do the implementation. So I would like to start myself, a little tight on time. But if anybody is interested in working on this kind of implementation, do not hesitate to contact me. And yeah, and also maybe if the interest about the from FreeGPP and BBF is still there, maybe we could consider adopting this document. So I see Rob, yeah.
Yeah, you have a nice cue.
So thank you for this work. I think it's interesting. I'm concerned on a few different things. There are a few points. So I think the first one is this feels like it's quite a major change to the Yang language to do this. And I'm concerned about doing this now as an extension as opposed to going to the next version of Yang. Ideally, that's where I would like to see it if we were to do this. I think I have concerns more generally as to whether we're making the Yang language more complex and whether this complexity is worth it. But I do see use cases where this is a useful thing to do. The other thing I wanted to say is when we were doing the Yang packages work, when that sort of got put on hold as we we're trying to finish the other drafts, we were looking at a sort of somewhat similar problem here of specifying schema mounts within the Yang package definition. And it's not quite the same as exactly putting in the module itself, but it is sort of quite close to potentially being design time because those packages can be used offline. And in particular, I think that one of the complexities here that is being glossed over is those modules that you're sort of including or embedding at that particular points is if they have augmentations and deviations and maybe different features being enabled, that's sort of being glossed over here. Whereas I think there's some complexities there. And if you had a Yang packages solution, it might be you could define a package for that subtree which fully resolves to a schema, and then you embed the package at that point, and hence it sort of then resolves those issues. So that might be something that's worth looking at. And the last comment is, I think this, like using a subtree of the schema again, I think is something that's probably a good idea. So in the the Yang push case, that's I think something case where that would be helpful. So it's interesting work. I'm not sure if this helped you.
Okay, yeah. So I can answer on the augmentation and deviation part. Yeah, basically you would need to list the augmenting module as well. So for instance, for the IETF IP that augments the IETF interfaces, you need to list both in the mounting point if you want to have both. So package would be a simplification then.
And in the case of like feature statements, and you, would you be allowed to have different augmentations and deviations for it mounted below as to where that module turns up elsewhere? So that's the bit.
Yeah. So basically, you have your Yang context, which is never defined anywhere. It's just a set of modules that are at the root. So it would be your root Yang library if you want. And then for each module that has embedding, you include the modules that you need. You can even use a different revision than the one in the root. It's allowed by Yang. And you would have these modules then in the mounting point. So you'd have a completely different Yang library for the embedded part, but that's only for the runtime. For the design time, it's just you have this exact set of modules that you are specifying is the one you would have in your mounting point.
Okay.
Olga Havel, Huawei. I think it's quite useful, and I think for your use case, I think not having the finer granularity is great, but I can see some use cases where having the subtree is really beneficial. Like for our hackathon, we are looking at what to do. We are copying, pasting, but it's not so simple mapping that you can just use the module. So I think having the parts is really important.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Rashad?
Deepak.
Oh, sorry, Deepak.
Yeah. Hi. Interesting presentation. I just wanted to highlight that the use cases that would be required by BBF would be covered as part of the upcoming presentation. One more question was in the previous session in IETF 119, there was a question about having more granularity in embedding certain modules, right? Instead of using prefixes. Is that still being pursued? Also, is it just part of the module, or can we customize that? Meaning, can we refine certain data nodes?
Yes, so I think it's still considered, and Olga just asked for it again. So I think it's definitely a nice to have feature, and I will still first do the implementation with the whole module because it would be simpler. And then when that works, try to see if we can go into the finer granularity, but definitely I see that it's needed as well.
Including the customization of, I mean, allowing refinements of certain nodes, or is it just sub trees or sub nodes?
I think maybe we should separate the features at some point, but yeah, I can see a use for that as well. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Rishad, Equinix. So +1 to what Rob said, very useful, worried about having that in the current Yang. Yang next intuitively seems to be the right spot. You mentioned augments have to be specified explicitly. What about deviations? Would that be automatic or?
I would say the same. Deviation have to be included. No, usually when you have a deviation, it's not on the official module. So maybe deviation would show up only in the Yang library part at runtime. But otherwise, you could technically put a deviation in your list set of modules, but that's a little bit weird because you're designing something with a deviation in it, and that's a little bit counterintuitive, I think.
Yeah, just I found it odd that you would have the deviation automatic in the normal path, but in your embed path. Anyway, it's a minor issue we can discuss offline if needed. Thank you.
So before you go, I'd like to go back to a comment that Rob said, is that it may be possible to solve this using the same mechanisms that are being defined for Yang packages. So Yang packages is work that's been taken by the group and has a broader utility. So if there's any way to leverage that and combine the solutions so that we have one set of mechanisms that we can use for two applications, that would, it's my opinion, and I think Kent doesn't object, it's as chair, it would be the interest of the group to combine those. So I'd like to ask that before you present this again and before the next meeting, to work offline with the authors of packages and see whether or not you can solve it using that same mechanism or a slight modification of it. Packages has been on the shelf. We're hoping it'll take it off the shelf. Now that we're getting Wascal, the versioning, you would really help the group if you could help move that base mechanism forward and also perhaps solve your problem as well.
Okay, yeah, I look into it, yeah.
Thank you so much. Did you walk away with the clicker?
Yeah.
It went behind the screen.
Okay, this is Oscar Gonzalez from Telefonica. So now I'm going to present an approach and a solution for a use case which is related to the previous one. It's not the same thing that what we are aiming to do here. So move
Go ahead.
Now it should work.
Okay. So here, I guess you are familiar with the device models and with the network models. So here, thing is in IETF, there is a huge amount of work in defining models targeted at the device. So they model parts of that configuration of the device. On the other hand, what we have, the current trend is to have network management systems, or now called the SDN controllers, that are the entry points to the devices. So they offer the capabilities of the network towards other layers. So typically we are exposing network services. Sometimes they are, for example, the VPNs, layer 2 VPNs, layer 3 VPNs, but there are some cases where the service is one part of the device configuration. So it's equal, it's the same thing. So for example, an access control list. Okay, an access control list is something that you can manage and you can reside in one single network element. So then in that case, okay, the model, the ACL model that was aimed at a device is perfectly usable for that purpose. here also routing policy is something also that you can manage. So there are few cases, okay, does not apply for everything in the device, but there are few cases where it is very useful to use this device model. So we can proceed in the, we can go to the next slide. I can a little bit of time. So the use cases that we are targeting is use this device configuration as a service. So we use this device model, okay, to manage it through the SDN controller. Okay, I have this ACL, put it in this device or in multiple devices, and also the use case of call profiling. So what we have observed is many times these entities are the same across multiple devices. For example, the access control list for the security of the box. Okay, yes. So you can, in Telefonica, they are, okay, all the similar network devices have the same set of ACLs, and then we even have some particular one, but we have some of them that are very common. So, okay, you define them in the controller, and then you apply them to all the grouped devices at the same time. So it's very useful. So both use cases we can apply to either one or to multiple network elements at the same time. Okay, so what is the approach? So we try to do a very lightweight approach. Okay, so here first of all is import the device model. How? Okay, this is something that we need to decide which is the best way, because one, we can solve this by augmentation, we could solve this by other means, but just the idea is to add to your device module a deployment container. Okay, you say, hey, I have my deployment container, and it tells you, okay, which are the network elements in which you target to deploy that particular piece of or that particular service or piece of configuration, and an alias. For example, one thing is the name that you have in your controller, and one different thing could be the name that you have in the device. Okay, so we allow that. So if you want to have it different, okay, it would be possible. You have a way to identify the network element, or you can also have a list of groups of network elements. Okay, so you can, as a network operator, decide, okay, these are all the same devices doing the same function. Okay, and then I want to, once I apply or I update my ACL, go to all of them. Once I apply this, update this routing policy, go to all of this set of devices. Okay, so here, same thing, it's just this group of network elements. It will have the list of network elements and an alias. So here, this grouping of network elements is just, we define this document, this grouping, that provides this list of network elements. So it's very easy. So it facilitates the network element. So all these things also are, let's say, solved today in many different implementations in different ways. So here, the reason to come also to IETF here is to see, hey, can we solve this? And can we agree on a common structure between us, and to have a common solution between us. Because I think the use case is quite, I've seen it a lot of times in the network operation. So here, one of the open questions that we have also is, okay, as we need to define this network element ID, is if we can also align with the inventory, because we were thinking, okay, which is the network element ID that we are using here. Okay, so here, let's try to harmonize also, as we are in IETF, let's try to harmonize, okay, the common way to refer in this. One possibility is to, okay, as I is defining a network element ID, okay, just to point to the inventory, or just leave it free and keep it, let's say, for every operator to choose what he wants. But I would prefer a common approach across the industry, so we can have a similar approach. So here, the next step, so here is just to understand if first, if this use case is also common to other people, okay, to other operators. So here, all the feedback is appreciated, because here, I mean, at least for us in Telefonica, this is a very common use case. As I say, it's not for all the configuration of the device, it's for particular things that we see it's useful. So is the work interesting to be carried out here at NETMOD? I think NETMOD seems to be the right place, but I want to to confirm. So here also we want to collect this feedback, refine the draft, okay, with things, and also look at this, for example, the full embed YAM that you presented, also to see if this is also applicable for this use case. I think it's complementary. I think the use case might be slightly different. Here it is not network element centric, is the model centric. So in this case, it will be ACL centric and not device centric. And receive feedback from you and to see, especially if you see, if you other people also see it useful. For us, it's something that we need in the operation.
Okay, so move to the queue. Italo.
It's Italo. One question, Oscar. Have you thought about the how to manage potential conflicts between the configuration done through the network model and the configuration done through the device model? Because now these two configurations are coexisting on the same interface, and you may configure two things which are incompatible to each other. Which one wins?
No, I don't care how it's the controller who will be responsible to configure in the device. So even the device might not be implementing any device model. It might implement the same. It's the controller who needs to take care of sending. So here, I'm not exposing the model that is in the device outside. No.
No, you're exposing a device model.
I am just I'm using that this is a device model. Okay, I use it here, and then the controller is responsible to talk to the device, and if he needs to configure via CLI, via SNMP.
No, I understand, but what happens if the configuration that you request on the device is incompatible with the configuration that you request on the network?
It will fail.
Okay, so you reject both configurations at the same time.
You will reject. I mean, you try. It's like it's your intent. It's like in any model.
I pointed. I have two intent and.
No, you will have one intent. You will not have two intents. Okay, you are managing through the controller. That piece of configuration will be entered by this one intent. There will be no other intent. Okay? And if something changes in the device, it will, let's say, if you change that in the device later by other means, okay, it will be out of sync and it would fail, of course. But that's common to any network device model. That question.
No, the point is that here you are on the same data on the same interface. You have two ways to configure the same thing, and you can have a conflict. For example, let me give an example. You can create a tunnel at the network level and say, "This is my path." The tunnel is implementing a static LSP, and then you go to the device and you create, you change the path of the LSP. Which is the path of the LSP? The one calculated on the tunnel or the one that you put on the device?
Can we take this comment onto the list, please? Thank you.
Yeah, we're running out of time. Alex?
Yes, hello. You mentioned basically alignment with network inventory, and I agree. And actually, one thing that is not quite clear to me from your presentation is why is this not part of network inventory? Isn't it already covered there? Can you explain that?
This is not taken for network inventory.
So why not? I mean, it seems basically the use case is very related, right? You want to group the devices which are in your network. This is pretty much what network inventory does, no?
Well, that could be part of the inventory. I don't care if the grouping of network elements could be part of the inventory. The main point of the draft is to be able to configure something in a set of group of device, and this something is today defined in a device model. Okay, that's the main point of the draft. So it's not the inventory thing could be the list of the group of devices. That could be part of an inventory.
Okay, all right. I'll reread it because it seems to me if you're talking about operating on a set of devices, that would be slightly different from what I saw from that. Anyway, it was just my feedback. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Joe, you're up, and we have two more comments to try to wrap up in the next minute. It's clear that there's a good opportunity for discussion on the list on this draft, no matter where we end up.
Yeah, I might take this, Joe Clark, I may take this to the list because I didn't really get your use case. And when you're talking to Italo, I think I understand. You have a controller knows a group of devices that all implement ACL and they all should get the same ACL. How that's configured southbound doesn't matter. I wonder if that's the case, and I'll follow up on this. I wonder why you even need this. Just let the controller figure out what the device supports and say, configure ACLs this way.
No, no, yeah, right. But what I am just saying is that you don't have in the controller. You need some structure to indicate the ACL where should it go. So this is just Rathe's pointing out that in the north bound of the controller, you expose the ACL Young model, which is already defined, and you add this this deployment structure next to it to say, hey, deploy it here, there, or there. Is the purpose.
I think there's a real, I'll follow up on this.
Okay, no, we can discuss that offline.
I'll just mention this, but maybe we'll have a chat afterwards. I'm just wondering, is it just any ID, or are there any other keys and mismatch between the keys northbound and southbound, and how to address that problem?
As I mentioned, southbound, I don't care in this one.
Yeah, it's just design. Yeah, but the design time still there are kind of different IDs and keys, so you don't need it. Okay, we'll talk.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to continue this discussion on list. This clearly, I don't know if there's interest, but there's at least confusion. So making it clear on the list and getting the questions would be great. Thank you. And now off to Kent for probably another good discussion.
Thank you. So this is RFC 7950 Biz and Friends, which means related drafts. Of course, you are already my friends. So Yang's been very successful. RFC 7950 was published almost a decade ago in 2015, sorry, 16. My glasses aren't aligned here. The Yang Next Issue Tracker has captured and cataloged 105 issues in 8 years so far. It's time to start Yang Next. The current focus of this work is to factor out the obvious parts that should not be present in 7950, including the sections that are entitled the XML encoding rules and the sections entitled netconf operations sections. Also, to rewrite other parts to not be XML only, including the sections noted as usage examples. And the current strategy is to simply add matching JSON examples to match along with the current XML examples. So what does it mean to factor out the obvious parts? So first off, of course, there's the draft itself, draft RFC 7950 Biz. And then there's the factoring out of the XML encoding, which would go to another draft called Yang XML. That name is picked because it was the same name that Lauda chose when he created RFC 7951, which is the JSON encoding rules for Yang model data. And then also a document called Yang Protocol Requirements, or Yang Proto. But that has some concerns, and we'll be talking about those in a moment. All right, first dragon. So the goal is to factor out the netconf operations sections that should not be present in the draft. The observation is that this should lead to an RFC 6241 Biz, right? And that work should be done in netconf, working group, not NETMOD. And yet there should also exist a document that defines generic requirements for all protocols, netconf, RESTconf, coreconf. For example, it must, like such a document might say, list pagination has to be supported, private candidate has to be supported. It'd be a way of consolidating the last decades of effort into a new protocol definition document. Hence the idea of a Yang protocol requirements document. Does this make sense? So the current status is that the Yang XML document is done. I did start with Lauda's table of contents and ported all the text from 7950 into it, and it's probably ready for adoption. The Yang protocol requirements document, I didn't start because it got complicated. And of course, the actual document itself, 7950 Biz, is a work in progress. So some details about 7950 Biz. What was the work that was done so far? First, I asked the RFC editor for the XML source. Then I added a makefile and cleared all the errors and warnings, reformatted it using tidy, rewrote the front matter, added production note to be removed by the editor, added a special thanks section, rewrote the introduction section, removed all the netconf usage sections, and removed all the XML encoding sections. There are some links. You can link to the GitHub commit history and see exactly that history there, as well as a link to the diff of the current document against RFC 7950 biz. Sorry, I mean 7950. Okay, so the other dragon. It's not actually my goal to publish a Yang 1.1 or to republish it, but that is what the current work is about. It just simply reproduces the existing, which is why it's called a biz. But my actual goal is to publish Yang 2.0, a non-backwards compatible version of Yang, which would not obsolete 7950, just like how 7950 did not obsolete 6020. To this end, a more suitable ID name might be Yang 2. The only reason this wasn't done now was to start the conversation. Also, technically speaking, the current focus doesn't change RFC 7950. So what is the conversation? How to proceed? First, there might be the question, should we proceed? Respectfully, if there's no intention to proceed, I feel like NETMOD should shut down. We would have completed our charter at that point. Next, with the assumption that this is a reasonably, knowing that this is a reasonably large project, how to distribute the work, how to distribute the load to avoid burnout, how to best utilize scarce resources, how to incentivize involvement. When would it make sense to adopt? Wait until the document is ready, which might be a while, or nowish, so the working group can start reviewing right away. Should this be done through a design team or as a GitHub project? If we use a design team, the scope would be set up front, members would be known up front, and I think we all know how this plays out, right? So currently, the versioning design team is working on the versioning work. If it were a GitHub project, the scope would be driven by individual interest. Members would be whomever submit pull requests. How this plays out is not well understood in the IETF. So just a couple more thoughts about how it might play out. The idea would be use GitHub workflows to automate adequate internal reviews amongst the authors or the contributors, followed by the editor bringing the result of each pull request to the work group before merging it to me. Another idea is that a designated set of experts would do the reviews, thus reducing their load. And that's the end of the presentation. Questions, comments, concerns?
Sorry, not in the queue. Jeff has. For your design team question, I think maybe sort of a middle model is the working group and or design team driven by the working group is there to basically say, this is the work, here's the space that we're going to go in, and you effectively are delegating out implementations of the agreed upon pieces of the work to whoever is willing to contribute.
Mahesh Jetanandani. You clearly indicated your interest was more in Yang 2.0, but I think at least some part of the work seemed to belong to something Yang 1.2, if I want to call it, where you're just stripping out the draft of all the XML examples. And it didn't come across, so I thought I'll just highlight that maybe there is the subtask that could also be identified. That's one comment. The other comment was, I love GitHub. I love the process. Yes, it hasn't been tried before, but maybe this is as good a time to try to see that works for this working group.
It actually was tried in a couple working groups before. I think Quick in particular used it. So it wouldn't be a first for the IETF. It's just not, we've never tried it before.
Okay, good to know that. And positive, negative feedback from Quick?
think it was positive. Rob's raising his hand. I think he has a response to that as well.
Yeah, one minor comment on your 1.2. For cleaning up a document, you don't need to change the revision number. And that's commonly done as you're going towards full standard, is you would go back and clean the document, make editorial changes, but not make any on-the-wire protocol changes. And I think there's room for that. There's also maybe room for 1.2. So it's just your example was not one that required a 1.2.
You're right.
So just to comment on the GitHub process for Quick. So that document, when it hit the ISG, I think was one of the most polished drafts I've ever written, because they had a large number of people collaborating, and the ability to put in small changes very easily and get them reviewed meant that the quality of the document was very high. So it might be because there's lots of other people, but I think from the output of the document, from using that process, it went very well. I can't speak to as the sort of engagement of the community in that process and whether that was, everyone was happy with that. For my comments, first I want to say thank you for starting this work, Kent, because actually it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of work. Some of it's not the most glamorous thing to get this stuff going, but I actually think it's important that we try and sort of sort out our documentation set and get to the point where Yang has a stable base that we can extend and do new revisions and sort of clean up some of the technical debt we have and loosen the baggage. So I definitely think the step of trying to at least publish a new version of Yang 1.1 is a notable goal in itself. I think that's a good thing to do. Lou made a comment, which I sort of agree to, is it might be that we want to do a Yang 1.2 and a Yang 2.0 together. And actually, I can imagine that some parts of the industry don't want to go to Yang 2.0, but there are smaller enhancements that they would like to pick up and put into Yang and publish a Yang 1.2 that's different from a massive step change to a much bigger language. The last comment I have here is in terms of, it feels to me like we need to have more discussion as to what the scope of what these two versions, if there's two versions, would look like. So there needs to be more discussion. We had a list of features and issues and things to try and actually work out at top level which ones could go into one of those and what the new language would look like, because that might sort of, people say, no, this is too big, or this is too complex, or it's too far away, or so having some sort of vision as to where we're heading might be helpful, both for either a Yang 1.2 or a Yang 2.0.
Okay, so for 1.2, I don't know, because that's I hadn't thought about that, but I think that's the middle path and sort of complements what Jeff thought of as well. For 2.0, again, my thinking is that it would be driven by individual interests, like who has the energy. If this were a group of volunteers, who is willing to volunteer to, write up a pull request and submit it and see it through. It's those who are having that energy to do that would do that effort. When all the volunteers have put down their pens because they no longer have energy or interest in any of the remaining Yang Next issues on the issue tracker, then at least as far as a volunteer perspective, we'd be done. We could bring it to the working group. I mean, of course, each pull request would be getting brought to the working group, but we would bring it to the working group that the work is completed, at least from a volunteer perspective, and see if it's adequate.
So
if it were the case that 25% of the Yang Next issue tracker issues didn't get resolved, then the working group might say, we want 10% more done, and they might select specific issues. But then the question would be, who's volunteering to do the work?
So it feels to me like those are like design level changes, and what I'm wondering or think we might need is like an architectural agreement as to what Yang 2.0 is trying to achieve. So what's its goal of where it's meant to go to? Is it just a set of enhancements, or is it trying to say, I want to open up new markets or address problems that Yang currently doesn't address? And having that sort of definition statement of where we're aiming for to then be able to evaluate and say, yes, this should go in and this shouldn't. Because otherwise I fear that if anyone could just bring things to the language, it could go in all sorts of directions and lose its cohesion and consistency and gain a lot of complexity at the same time.
Okay, I think that's a good comment. Certainly, if we were to move forward with this effort, we can make an attempt to put together a paragraph that described what we thought was the vision for the overall effort, the motivation for it.
Okay, thank you.
Rashad, so first question is, I'm assuming the Yang versioning stuff would be part of Yang Next? So,
Yes.
so does that mean we would need to wait until?
No, I don't, wait. You say that again and make sure you're hearing the question. Okay. Say your question again. I think he answered a different question than you asked.
Okay, my name is Rashad. No.
No.
Second
no,
part.
Sorry,
Yang,
say the question again.
Would the Yang versioning work be part of Yang Next effort?
That was the question I heard before and why I said yes. But on the slide I mentioned, it would be an attempt to consolidate. Remember that Yang protocol requirements document I mentioned?
Yep.
The idea is that we would put together a document that specified requirements for NetConf Next, RESTConf Next, CoreConf Next.
Okay.
And
But
it
he's-
would
but he-
include the versioning work.
An important process point. He's not saying we stop the documents that we said were about to last call earlier.
Okay.
It would roll that work into, that would work would be rolled forward as well. It's not an alternative.
Thank you.
Okay. And the second part,
That's
I
the
mean,
part that I wanted to clarify.
second question on this is, this seems to be either or, but if we look at the versioning design team, we started with the design team. I mean, can you go back to that slide, please?
Yes.
We started on the left, and then, we use GitHub, and then people who are not part of the design team joined. There was Jan, Per, Italo, depending on various, so to me, I don't really get the point of why is it one versus the other one as opposed to a combination of the two, but
I think, perhaps, certainly the design team could use GitHub and pull requests and workflows and whatnot. I think the difference is perhaps the cathedral versus the bazaar. Are we going to architect and everything up front and try to figure it out, and then go down requirements in a waterfall fashion, or is it going to be a very agile effort where we don't actually know where we're going to end up until we get started and people start using the energies to submit pull requests?
Okay, thank you.
Thomas Graf, thanks for this great work. I think this is really good preparation work, and especially also that you're dividing the XML and the definition of Yang into two separate documents. I want to follow up on the comment from Rob, and I think it's a good idea or a good proposal, 1.2 having like small changes and 2.0 more the bigger changes. And one question's on the third documents, the requirements, where would be the requirements coming from? And is this somewhat related to the IEB workshop?
Oh, great question. Well, first off, we might need to talk about which working group does that belong to. Yang is not the protocol working group. It should be NetConf working group that would take that work on to define a protocol requirements document. Would they involve IAB or the other, to what extent? I don't know. But that's a great comment, and perhaps the AD would have a thought about that.
Good, thanks.
No? Okay.
Jeff Haas again. Partially in response to what Rob sort of raised, has there been a triage effort to go through the list and say, here are rough buckets, things that are in?
Yes.
I didn't see that in like the GitHub tags.
It was about 6 years ago, I think. There were side meetings at an IETF, I forget which one, but we did, and you can go to GitHub and look for, I think it's called a project, and they're actually very nicely labeled, and please take a look at that. We didn't get through them all though. We only, after even, I think, the whole 4 or 5 hours with 20 people in the room, we only got through about 60% of the issues.
That's very common. And if that sort of effort has been done, I'll take a look at the existing stuff there. Part of the architecture, front loading of the project, if you can come up with like common rules of what a given piece needs. So, as an example, I care about data types. If I want to add a data type, what do I need to include? It's like, what does the data type do? How it behaves? What are the representation impacts? And like if it's rendered in XML, JSON, etc. If we have sort of the work list for a given type of thing, if it neatly falls into that, that's another way to sort of ease the workflow.
Andy Bierman, sorry I couldn't join the queue. I don't know why my app isn't working right. Actually, I don't see a lot of end user value in republishing Yang 1.1. I haven't heard any interest from customers or any problems reading RFC 7950. In fact, I've heard it's actually one of the best documents that network management has ever produced. I would like to see some energy going to finishing the Yang Next list. We couldn't even get a design team going. There was going to be a design team, and then it never happened. There was people willing to go through the list of 105 issues. And if we can't even get any consensus on what new features we're adding, then we shouldn't even bother. But I don't think a new version of Yang that's just a rehash of the current documents serves anyone except the IETF. It doesn't serve the community at large, in my opinion. A new version of Yang with consensus for new features, that's something else. Whether it's 1.2 or 2.0, I don't know. You have to go through the list and see where the consensus is. And I don't really like the idea of changing the working group consensus project to an open source pull request model. I'd rather see things worked out by the working group and added because there's consensus along the way. But so I fully support going through the Yang Next list. There's not a lot there that I think is that interesting, but there's maybe not. Maybe there's 30 things or something. I don't know. There hasn't even been enough energy to go through that list, and so that's really a concern of mine.
Right. So I was I guess volunteered myself to be the instigator or the promoter of the whole Yang Next effort. I created the Yang Next GitHub repo long ago to start tracking the catalog. I was the one that organized that design and side meeting sessions to do what categorization we created. I lost energy, and I also didn't. I just volunteer work. It's literally my free time. I choose to spend on it. About 5 years ago, I raised the issue again. I forget which meeting it was, but there was pushback and concern that any change would disrupt the industry at large and would be very detrimental to Yang being published. But now I think with all the issues that we're currently facing with Yang versioning, it's a great time to revisit that. I have the energy now to do this, and so why I'm bringing it to work group. Go ahead.
Mahesh, I came up just because Kent, you prompted me to for a comment, and I was trying to get the context of the statement. I think people are missing this list of issues that Andy just referred to, and you have very well tagged under the project. So maybe a reference to the GitHub location where these list of 100+ ish next features have been documented would be helpful to the. I'm surprised that people haven't been able to see that. And instead of going through a formal process of trying to collect any more requirements, I think we have a fairly decent set of requirements already in place. I don't know if we need another workshop or a get together to really get any more requirements.
Agreed.
Sorry.
Agree that we have a good list, and there's probably no need to create more to it. But I guess that's the distinction of of the two approaches. With the other approach, we don't even have to complete the list. It's just yes, it's there, and if people want to submit a pull request for an item that's in the list, whether or not it's been categorized or the whole intent back then was to categorize things specifically on 3 axes: backward compatibility, complexity, and importance. But if you go to the bizarre approach, it's actually doesn't matter. It's actually up to the individual and what they want to self-prioritize. So if whether or not we actually complete the categorization would be probably dependent on the choice.
Right, and you can tag any pull request to a particular issue that you're addressing, thereby closing it if you feel you have addressed the issue.
Yeah.
So to close on this discussion, we're out of time. So to close on it, I think this has been a really good discussion. I think there is clearly interest in talking about a Yang Next. I think there's a little bit of unclarity of what the group would like to achieve with that. So I'd like to suggest Kent, if you could put together some discussion on motivation and objectives, that if we can get agreement on that, that will allow us to go talk about mechanisms. And then when we get to mechanisms, we can say, is this something that belongs in 2.0, 1.2, maybe even an extension? It doesn't even need to go to, perhaps it's 1.1 plus an extension, but we can have that conversation in context. So if we can start out with that motivation objectives, completely separately is how we work with Git. Personally, I do a lot of open source work and we use Git all the time. I think that's a great thing. We do not need to change our consensus process to do that. We can work on a more agile, that's the vogue term right now. We can be more agile and then bring it back to the working group and say, this resulting document, do we agree or not? So we don't even need to change our processes. We should just go forth and start doing these, the contributions that you're talking about and Git. That would be awesome. But we're out of time on yours, so we really have to go to the very last presentation. You have about 5 minutes, but thank you, Ken, for getting this started. And more importantly, thank you for help shepherding it in the future. Everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Lou. Thank you, Kent. As Shayan, the BBF liaison officer, has talk about the BBF liaison, and this liaison introduces large-scale management issue, and this issue has been, become a very common issue in the telecom industry, and BBF has provided some analysis about this issue, but from BBF side, we would like to receive the suggestions from IETF about the next step to resolve this issue. And Deepak will introduce this slides. Okay, please, Deepak.
Thank you. So, yeah, let me, in the interest of time, let me just directly go to the
Yeah, and I'm
slide
sorry,
deck.
you're not going to have a lot of time.
I understand. Let me just, yeah, quickly walk through the executive summary slide, wherein we just highlight the use cases and the issues that is faced, right? So, yeah, so currently what we have is we have a problem at scaling up certain systems, which in the magnitude of, let's say, 30,000 plus interfaces, which currently is built upon standard modules from such as IETF, right? The network we are talking about is a typical PON network, which includes an OLT and ONUs, hundreds and thousands of ONUs together. So at the current standard models do not scale at that size, and it becomes typically difficult to deploy for such use cases. And the problem that we are talking about is not tomorrow's problem. It's already in the running code. As more and more people are onboarding with NetConf and Yang as management systems, we are seeing this as a real world problem. So what was done in BBF was to take an example of ONU management. But okay, the context is ONU management of this slide, but it is not restricted to ONU management alone. It is applicable to any large product, right? So as a study, we conducted a study, and we found out a few salient points there, which is basically we can define a list of ONUs, or we call it clustering, where related nodes could be clustered instead of interleaving between the OLTs and ONUs. And second point that was being configuring at an OLT level, which is basically outside the clustered list of ONUs, create a list of shared profiles that each ONU can refer, thereby reducing the data store size. And the third point is something called the template, which is basically an identical configuration. Many of the ONUs would be referring to identical configurations, and they don't have to be configured at an instance level. Instead, a template could be created, which could further reduce the data store size. And more importantly, the validation time. So making the performance much better than having it individually under each instance. So what these study points translate as requirements would be the data nodes, which is originally defined at the root of the standard models, should be able to be moved deeper into the Yang tree. Example, the interfaces slash interface is typically translated into ONUs and ONU, which is the clustered container. It can be moved under that XMARC. So it can be referred there. The second requirement is pretty important one, about which we have further information in the upcoming slides. The ONU instance data nodes can have their mandatory and the default statements removed to avoid interference with the template. More explanation about this point or this requirement is in the upcoming slides. The third one being ONU instance and the template data nodes can refer to the data nodes located at the root of the tree, shared profiles, right? So we did have a look at the existing schema mount and the newly proposed draft. So definitely it has its own use cases and it serves its purpose. But when it comes to scalability, it doesn't seem to cater to the second and third requirements as such. Right. Maybe if you.
So we're really out of time. We're actually over time. Thank you for sending the liaison and thank you for the presentation. I invite all those in the working group to take a look. Going back to your previous slide, it sounds like you have some recommendations. I'll point out that we would very much welcome your contribution in the IETF and through the normal process. That would be through a working group, through a document or draft submitted to the working group for discussion here. So if you have recommendations on how we should be structuring our Yang models, the right thing would be to put that into a document that we can then run through the process and say, yes, we agree with it. Yes, the whole group agrees. Then it can become even a consensus document in the IETF. So we think that the right next step here is to bring this work into the IETF through an IETF document. That's the best way to get us to make comments. You know, we don't really conduct business through liaisons. It's really through contributions.
I understand. But I would highly encourage people of this group to go over these slides and provide their comments over the mailing list. At the same time, I do agree that maybe we can create a separate draft explaining more in detail about these proposals. And maybe if people are interested, they could also collaborate with us to make the contribution.
Yeah, that would be great, because if you have a specific proposal, we can run that through the working group process. And that would be really helpful and allow your issues to be addressed. Thank you very much. And thank you to all who contributed to this meeting. It's early in the week, but we'll see you at the next meeting and online.
Okay, thank you.
So please send comments to the list to continue the discussion. Thank you.
All right. It's a wrap.